Hello everyone and welcome to this media author session. Today we're going to talk about From Zero to CCIE Security, and that is talking about the tips to prepare for the CCNP and CCIE Security core exam. My name is Hilda Arteaga and I am a community manager of the Cisco community and the host of today's event. So before I get started, just to let you know, for those of you who have this first experience in this media authors event, so this is an special event where you can learn actually more from the IT expert that literally has wrote more than 20 books. I think he's getting to 30 right now, and very diverse security content. So along this session, you will be able to learn more about the key topics covering the Cisco CCNP and CCIE Security certifications, as well as the best tips to achieve them. For today's media authors event, we will actually start the session with an interview to the author, that is Omar, so we'll get to know more about him, his career path, his collaboration on the different publications, and then Omar will go through the whole content just to get started and prepare for these Cisco security certifications. Also, we have great news for you. During this presentation, you will be able to actually win a free signed copy by Omar of this book as well. And we also are going to give one video course of this book also given by Omar, and we're going to select the winners. So how can you win? Well, just please stay tuned with us, and we are going to let you know how that's going to happen. But remember, you have to be till the end just to be a winner of one of these copies. And well, let's start with this special event. So welcome, Omar, and thank you so much for joining us this second time. You're actually an icon on the security field and in IT as well. And well, you're just very well known not only for being a Cisco Press author, a Pearson author, a distinguished expert, a principal engineer, but also someone who has been helping out many others around the globe. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, and you're too kind. I would probably not say that as an icon, fully emoji. But, yeah. I guess that would be a nice question. Which emoji would you be? All right. I don't know what to respond. That's too hard, right? Okay, let's go for an easy one. So actually, there are too many questions, and this is the second time you are joining us for this kind of event. And for those of you who didn't have the chance to join before, Omar has also the one session like this talking about another of his publications. But still, we would like to know more about you, Omar, and your career, just for those who haven't got the chance to meet you. And the first thing that I would like to ask is, what was your main driver to start your career in technology? Yeah, so technology and security, right? So I guess for me to get started in technology started since I was a kid, right? I was very passionate of actually knowing how things actually work, even though technology has changed since then tremendously. But that's what it actually sparked me. You know, I started learning how to program fairly early. I think I was 9 when I was playing with BASIC and so on. But then what it really transitioned is whenever I graduated and I joined the United States Marine Corps. So in there, I was actually, I started in secure communications. So a lot of the things that I did was for classified networks and also ground and radar communication. And then I transitioned to cryptography. From there, and then I transitioned to networking. And that's where I actually started my interest in security, because we actually had to, of course, secure the very early network implementations that we were doing with Cisco technology at the time, right? And then from there, I joined Cisco. I joined Cisco in the TAC. I've been at Cisco for 20 years now, so I guess I'm hesitating because I guess I'm getting old now. But yeah, it's been 20 years at Cisco. I started in the TAC, but then I transitioned to a group that we used to call the security practice. It's now we call CX, customer experience. And in there, I was actually doing ethical hacking, so penetration testing. I was doing security architecture reviews, what people now call purple teaming, which is actually, looking into adversarial techniques into an environment, making some recommendations and sitting down with the security operations center. Back in the day, basically was just consulting services, right? And then now what I do is that I investigate the bad news whenever it comes to vulnerabilities in all Cisco products and things that affect
technology outside of Cisco. So for example, if there's a protocol vulnerability, let's say on TCP, BGP, OSPF, WPA, the list goes on, I get engaged, right? So I collaborate a lot with different industry standards bodies, and also a lot of organizations like the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, like FIRST, and many others. But that's how I kind of grew by osmosis into the security career.
Thank you very much, Omar. And you were mentioning about within 2 decades in Cisco, that you really learn a lot from that CX experience. So do you have any particular story or something that actually changed your life when you were on that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever, so my career started, of course, in the government, right? So it's a little bit different environment. And as a matter of fact, even the technology in some cases were a lot different than whenever I joined Cisco. But then whenever I joined Cisco, I was actually seeing everything that was broken. Why? Because I was in attack, right? So I was actually getting all the broken things from a networking and security perspective, right? So customers, of course, call Cisco whenever they actually are trying to implement something or have questions about configurations and implementations and so on. But whenever I shifted into, again, we used to call it advanced services, in that aspect, it was actually getting things to work and seeing, the other side of security, not so much of getting a firewall to work, but how an attacker can bypass a firewall, right? Or how an attacker can actually perform some adversarial, what we call now tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? TTPs. And that's what actually opened my eyes, right? And I got super more interested into really deep diving into other areas like pen testing, a little bit of reverse engineering, and so on, right? And it leads me into what I do now, right? Within the PSER team. Yeah. So that I will say that was the chasm, right? So bypassing that chasm of actually seeing how adversaries really do these type of attacks, not so much of just implementing a firewall or an IPS system.
All right. Thank you very much, Omar. And now talking more about what's happening and what has been happening in the last months. We all are very familiar with the pandemic, and I hope all of you are well, actually. And this pandemic has changed many things, including actually the way we use and perceive security. It has always been important, but now it turns out to be extremely important. So what are your thoughts regards everything that's happening and what's going to happen with the security, or what's happening here?
Yeah, so the landscape, it continues to change, right? It doesn't matter, if we're working from home or not, but now that we're working from home, the way that it's changed, the way that it's actually the attackers are now targeting things is that it's targeting the people working at home, right? So looking at how, because in some cases, individuals actually use corporate assets in their homes, or they actually take shortcuts to get connectivity going, right? And not connect to VPN all the time, or connect to VPN and so on. So there's a lot of focus into the threat actors and the bad guys to seeing how can I compromise people's home machines, right? And then using that as a stepping stone to the rest of the company, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody, one way or the other is actually working from home more now than ever before. And that emphasis on actually looking into vulnerabilities, into even the protocols and the technologies that are actually trying to help protect us, right, is a big shift, right? And we're seeing that in waves in many different areas, not so much of technology companies like Cisco and people working from home, but in many others that unfortunately they are not as blessed as a large company like Cisco, that we have a lot of resources and we have already have procedures in place to secure teleworkers. Now a lot of companies are trying to figure that out, right? What we figured out 10 years ago, some of these companies are now actually trying to do that for the first time. So that's where the bad guys actually capitalize on that and try to take that into their advantage, right? And look for holes into those implementations.
All right. Thank you so much, Omar. And actually, you actually covered something that I was going to ask you And well, you're right. So just to close down this part of the session is something that we're kind of curious about. What have been or what are your favorite activities during this working from home and lockdown time?
I'm a complete 100% nerd, so I also work from home. So one of the things, I used to travel a lot, right? I probably travel at least 25% of the time before the pandemic. So now that it's shifted, yes, I actually work from home, and of course the working hours are a lot longer now because you don't pay attention to time, and it's already midnight and you're still working. But one of the things that actually I really enjoy is what we're talking about here today, right? Writing books, writing video courses, getting engaged with the community, and a shift that we're seeing not only at Cisco with Cisco Live and everything, but a lot of other community events like the security conferences and so on. They're all virtual now, right? So what it allowed me to do is actually participate into some other activities in the community and give back, right? And give back in the way of actually trying to organize free training for the community and other events and so on, and of course trying to keep up with the books for the certifications that I was actually a little bit behind.
All right. I was actually going to ask something like that because actually since the mid-90s you have been working in these areas, information technology and cybersecurity. And you also already mentioned, well, I'm kind of like a nerd, a geek. And the thing is, like, what is actually your motivation to help out all this community, Omar, or what is driving you to make all these, like the security conferences, the publications, the books?
As a matter of fact, the number one thing, and this may sound fairly corny and kind of fluff, but the community is what actually what drives me. I'm looking down the listing here, and actually I can recognize people, and I think that was actually mentioning this to you, like Gus, right, and Kudos, Marin, as well. I see them, in the attendee list. See, these are folks that that are fairly active in the community, not only within the Cisco community, but in the industry as well, right? So that's what drives me to do some of these things, and also from learning from them, right? Because it's not so much of only me, sharing, what the new technology is. It's actually learning, right? You have to be very, very humble because you're never, ever, ever are going to be an expert in security. And I repeat this, even though we have experts, security changes on a daily basis. Everything around technology, security actually applies to it. So you will never be able to catch up, right? So you always actually have to learn from each other. And especially for nowadays that attacks are getting more sophisticated, the attackers actually getting a lot more resources, right? The battlefield is actually changing a lot. So we need each other as a community. Anyways, hopefully that makes sense.
It does make sense a lot. And actually, talking about all this huge range and all these changes and everything that you do, and particularly all the changes in the Cisco certifications portfolio,
yep.
How do you decide, actually, Omar, in what you should focus or what you should write about something?
Yeah, so in my case, it's a little bit, I guess, a little bit different, right? Because I have worked a lot with the Cisco Press and Pearson, which is the parent company of Cisco Press, and because of that, of course, they always ask me, hey, there's this certification. I know that you're actually contributing to the certification. Can you, can you help us in writing this type of books and everything? So it's kind of like, by request in some cases, but I super enjoy it. And the other thing is that I drive myself to master a topic into the way that's kind of my satisfaction, that I can write and I can share the knowledge with somebody else, right? So it's kind of like a personal goal too, that, not only that I should learn, the new techniques and the new technologies that are actually coming in and the new security, solutions, but into the fact that actually drives me to share the knowledge with others. And that's what, that my satisfaction comes in.
Awesome. And talking about satisfaction and challenges and things that make us so exciting, or actually yourself, with all these changes in the Cisco security certifications, I know they cover a huge range of topics, right? But what topics you find it more challenging or more exciting, or you say like, oh wow, I'm covering all these, but this one's wow, it cost me something different.
Yeah, and there. So today we're going to be talking about the CCNP and CCIE Security Core, which is fairly broad, right? So for that one, it's not so much that one technology is more difficult than the other one. It depends on, unfortunately, the individual. In some cases, actually, you may be already familiar with VPNs, and you have never been, exposed to network programmability, and especially whenever it comes to security automation, orchestration, and so on, right? Or vice versa. You may be actually a software engineer, but you never actually were exposed to some of the crypto and VPN technologies and so on. So it all depends on the scenario. It will be very unfair for me to say, okay, this is actually more difficult than the other. But the number one thing is that is specifically for the CCNP and CCIE Security Core exam is super broad. You are touching pretty much every single technology and solution that we have at Cisco. So it's not so much of the difficulty, because that is the required exam for both the CCNP and the CCIE Core, and I'm going to cover some of that and a couple of tips on that, of course. But because of that, we have to make that exam a CCIE level type, exam as well, right? So it's kind of in between. Now, since it's the required exam for CCNP, it's kind of like we push the bar higher limit for the CCNP. And then, for CCIE, of course, getting a good foundation. And, whenever you take the lab, that's a different story, because you actually have to know how to troubleshoot and implement it, right? But I'll cover some of that in a few minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, you will cover tons of that. So I have a last question just to complete this interview session. And before I make that question, I'd just like to tell the audience that all of your questions, the ones that you have from Omar, we are going to cover them. But we are going to do that at the end of this session, once Omar covers all his slides, right? So please don't think that we are not paying attention to you. It's just we will answer them after the presentation. So the last question I would like to do, Omar, even though we have too many, just like the new Cisco Certified Cyber Professional certification is actually coming in mid-November. So could you please sum up your thoughts about this? Because this is something trending and going on, right?
Yeah, and so as a matter of fact, that's probably the number one question that I get all the time. Should I even go for the CCNP, CCIE Security, or even CCNP, right? I mean, we don't have a CCIE or equivalent for CyberOps. But there are two completely different tracks, right? So if you are tasked to deploy, configure, and troubleshoot a Cisco technology, like a firewall, IPS device, umbrella, the list goes on and on, then the CCNP, CCIE Security track will be the one that I will recommend. Now, if you're thinking about shifting gears into a career in security operations, so in other words, being an analyst in a security operations center, and then that's the CyberOps track. So we already have the associate level certification, which before it was the CCNA CyberOps, now it's CCNA Associates, and now with the professional level, what we're doing is actually we're preparing folks that want to be a tier 2 and tier 3 analyst in a security operations center. So in that case, we're actually introducing more modern topics into threat hunting, adversarial emulations, what is SCOR, or security orchestration and automation and response, how does that actually differ from the older SIM type technologies, right, and so on. So that's really focused into the incident response and digital forensics, and the other ones are actually focused on the Cisco technologies. So the CCNP, CCIE Security, Cisco technologies, the other one is more into the operation side. Still using Cisco technologies, but most into the life of an analyst in a security operations center.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mark. So now it's time from zero to CCIE Security. So what I'm going to give you I'm going to share you the presenter's role and the microphone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a lot of slides in here that I'll make available. These are basically talking points. We will not have enough time to cover every single thing that I have here in the agenda, but at least I wanted to give you tips on how to get started, how to prioritize things, how to organize yourself, and what are the somewhat of the techniques on how to navigate through the preparation of the exam, right? Now, I'm going to start with a very brief introduction to the CCNP, CCIE security certifications. We already talked about professional versus CCNP security, so hopefully in there we can skip that. And now I'm going to go over some of the cybersecurity concepts that you need to know and some of the changes that we have actually done, because you do not need to be a CCNA to take the CCNP or the CCIE, right, to take the core exam. And we're only talking about here today about the core exam, not the concentration exams or the lab. That's a different story, and so on. But as you see in here, what I did is actually I segregated all the different bullet points, if you will, based on the blueprint of the exam. So from the cybersecurity concepts, network security, security in the cloud, content security, endpoint protection and detection, and secure network access and visibility and enforcement. But what I would like to do, just looking at the time, is also giving you a lot of time to ask questions, right? Now, one of the things that I want to actually cover is that this is, as I mentioned to you, the exam that is required for the CCNP security and CCIE security certification. A lot of people actually combine these with other exams, right, to pass other certifications within Cisco. And I'll share with you some of those tips and I guess I will not call them shortcuts, but I will call them a little bit tips on to how to navigate to the certification. So the first thing is that if you pass just this exam, you automatically get a specialist certification, a Cisco certified specialist certification, right? Which is different than what we actually had before, because if you remember, back in the day, and I say back in the day, literally a year ago or less, whenever we had CCNP, you have to pass a whole bunch of exams, and you will not get credit until you actually pass all of them, right? Now, at least you actually get in certifications as you actually go through, right? Especially the specialist certification, right? Now, once you take the exam, this is where you have to make a really strong decision. Should I go for the CCNP or should I go for CCIE security? A lot of people that I talk to, right, and I just getting started, are going for the CCNP. The reason for that is because I cannot sugarcoat it. CCIE security is a monster, right? It's an expectation you probably have at least 5 years of experience, hands-on experience with most of these technologies, right? And the reality is that whenever you go to CCIE, you may be an engineer that is specialized on VPNs, right? And you never had the opportunity to actually go into network programmability or go into, managing firepower threat defense or managing or, an implementation or I guess through cloud services like Umbrella or Duo and so on. But for the exam, you need to know all of them, right? So first thing is that, you pass that core exam. Once you pass that core exam, you probably are going to find that you are going to have a passion for a specific concentration. And that's where people actually go into the CCNP security, right? And then look for that concentration and pass it. And then throughout time, you probably pick another concentration and then say, okay, now I'm ready to actually go to CCIE. Unless you are in a scenario, I am spoiled. I cannot also sugarcoat that because I work for Cisco, right? And I have access to pretty much all the technology that Cisco actually sells. So for me, I'm not a good example, right? And many of my colleagues, what they do is they go straight to the CCIE, and yes, they can pass it and everything, but we're spoiled. We actually have access to all that, right? In the majority of the individuals out there, they don't. You are concentrating into one, and that's where CCNP security comes into play. However, another thing that a lot of people are doing, and I'm going to do a kind of a whiteboard here to explain it a little bit better, because you have DevNet, which is very popular nowadays, right? And you have this CCNP. I'm just going to put sec in here, right? And I'm going to concentrate on CCNP security for now, right? But DevNet Professional, so I'll put Pro, has a core exam. And we have a core exam here, right? And then you have a concentration exam for DevNet, and there's several of them, and several concentration exams for CCNP. But there's one called SAuto, at least the acronym, Security Automation. That exam, which is a concentration exam that counts for the CCNP Security and counts for DevNet Professional, if you take it the both core exams and take the SAuto exam, basically you get, let's say, 5 certifications, because you get the specialist certification from the core exam, so that's 1. Now that you pass this one, the specialist certification for SAuto, that's 2. The DevNet Pro, that's 3. And the CCNP Security, that's 4. And the specialist certification for the core, right? So again, it's not like it's a race for how many certifications you can get, but you're combining things that are more, I will not say more modern, right? But they're very high in demand, like automation, programmability, interacting with the APIs of the products that Cisco actually has for security, and learning basically the constructs of Python and so on. And in that case, a lot of people actually select that path because it's a win-win situation. You're getting the benefits of network programmability and the next evolution of automation and so on, and of course the other side of security, right? So that's something that is super popular nowadays with this certification, right? And why a lot of people actually select to get this core exam, right? Now, what I always recommend is that you concentrate your learning path based on the blueprint of the certification. That is at the end of the day, the single source of truth, right? And I'm not going to go into every single one of them in here, but what I did is that I post these slides, I put a mind map of every single thing that I have in that certification and the specific, we're talking about a book in here, so the specific chapters of that book, right? And in that case, if you actually go to, I don't know, network security, and you already feel super comfortable into the network security domain, and that's 20% of the exam, you can actually, minimize that and then concentrate on the securing the cloud or endpoint protection and so on, and then focus into that, and it will be a little bit more of a better learning path for you, and so on, right? So I have that available. It's completely public, and I'll make the slides available to you. Now, we already talked about the CyberOps professional. The only thing that I actually didn't mention, of course, is that the exam is going to be available, or both of the exams, in the November timeframe, November 17th to be exact. There's a core exam, just like the CCNP, CCIE, and there's 4 now, only 1 concentration exam, but stay tuned because Cisco is going to continue to evolve certifications, and they're going to continue to actually put more concentration exams. But the concentration exam that we actually already announced is the Conducting Forensics Analysis and Incident Response using Cisco Technologies for CyberOps. That's a mouthful. But it's a lot different than, of course, implementing and troubleshooting and deploying the technologies. This actually is using the technologies to respond to an attack, or to perform forensics, right? Or to actually perform in threat hunting, and so on, right? So that one already, even if it's not out yet, is becoming super popular as well. All right, so shifting back into the exam, whenever it comes to software-defined networking security, that's something that we actually added to this CCNP, CCIE program that was not there before, and where a lot of people actually, I will not say struggle, but going back to Hilda's a question about, hey, what are the things that you probably need a little bit more help, or should you highlight that may be a little bit more difficult for some people? I'm not saying that it's difficult, right? I'm just saying that it's new, right? But in many cases, you actually have to be very versed into what is SDN, software-defined networking. What are the threats against an SDN implementation? For example, how do you protect a controller, an SDN controller? What are the types of SDN controller? What is Cisco DNA Center, which is an SDN controller, or APIC in ACI, right? What are the things that by default some of those controllers actually introduce to help security, like contracts in ACI, right? And those definitions of access control, how access controls actually are being done for not only doing traditional segmentation, but also micro-segmentation. You also have to know what is micro-segmentation, right? And what are the benefits for that, right? What are the challenges? So the exam is super broad. You don't have to, for the core exam, I'm not talking about the concentrations, but for the core exam, you don't have to troubleshoot and configure and things like that, but you definitely need to know, to the detail on what are, these type of solutions, and also even including the open source solutions like Open Daylight projects, Open vSwitch, for example, and so on. At least become familiar with them and how do they play part of the overall, IT solution, and also for security, for cybersecurity, right? And what are the threats and the mitigations for some of those, right? So for both sides of the coin, what are the threats against SDN solutions and what are the security benefits of an SDN solution? Whenever it comes to network programmability, the first thing that I always recommend is go to DevNet, right? Even though, yes, I wrote a book and you can read it and it's boring and you can probably put it as a doorstopper and so on. Number one thing, whenever it comes to APIs, introduction to Git, and I strongly suggest that whenever it comes to this, programmability, APIs, and everything, even though this is not a hands-on exam, you do the hands-on process, right? So you start playing with Git, become familiar with all the constructs of Git, you become familiar with, how to use basic Python scripts to interact with something like an ICE API or PXGrid. You need to know what is PXGrid, right? Which is a technology that we introduced originally mostly was for ICE, for the Cisco Identity Service Engine, to then integrate with third-party components, right? Like MDM technologies, other security products, and so on, right? And so you have to, just each of these slides can be a course by itself. So it's a very broad exam, but the best way, at least for network programmability, for you to become familiar with this type of topics is by actually doing it, right? And in DevNet, they actually have free, completely free, a lot of tutorials, videos, exercises, labs that you can actually complete. Again, completely free, that you don't have to, pay any extra. Now, whenever it comes to other topics like identity management and AAA, of course, I decompose them here for you. Basically, as I hate to say this because I don't like the word checklist, because hopefully you're not preparing for certification just to pass an exam. You're preparing for a certification to actually apply that knowledge into your work, so then you can get promoted. Of course, you can actually contribute to others, and hopefully, in the next year, next 2 years, I am the one reading a book from you, right? And you say, hey, it was actually this boring webinar that you actually were giving, but at least, give me some perspective. I'm actually, applying what I'm actually learning into my work, right? But even though I hate the words checklist, these are actually somewhat of a path on what are the things that you should prioritize whenever it comes to these type of domains, right? So identity management, also the cybersecurity components that you need to know for the exam. And one of the challenges, or changes, not challenges, but the changes that we actually have introduced in the new certifications is that we now don't have a CCNA security, right? We do have a CyberOps associate, which used to be the CCNA as CyberOps, but you don't have, a full exam and a full curriculum for the associate level for security whenever it comes to CCNP, CCIE, track. We do have a CCNA that has a very small percentage, I think it's 20% of the CCNA that is dedicated to security, but it's not going to be enough. What we assume in the CCNA or in the CCNP and of course CCIE track is that you already know some of these concepts. What I did in the book, of course, what we are doing in some of the supplemental trainings that we have at Cisco and so on is actually still introducing you to those type of backgrounds. Like you definitely need to know what is a malware. You need to know what is ransomware. You need to know how data breaches occur. You need to know what is SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, denial of service, buffer overflows. All that is a given that you need to know, right? But you also have to know the newer techniques on how attackers compromise APIs. You need to know how security threats in the clouds and DevOps environments and some of the challenges and also benefits on security in the world of DevOps. You need to know what is DevSecOps. You need to know all the different aspects of, not as a practitioner per se, as a programmer, but at least you need to know what is Agile, what is the continuous integration, continuous delivery techniques, in programming. Also, how in some cases security assessments are somewhat obsolete. Point in time, what are the things that in security and cybersecurity you actually are trying to move security to the left? That means that you're trying to integrate security as early as possible in the developing process, right? What are the tools to do that? What is static analysis, dynamic analysis, software composition analysis, open source security? All that you need to know for the exam, right? And I'm just scratching the surface. You see that it's actually fairly broad, right? Then I haven't even talked about cryptography, right? You need to know what is cryptography, what is cryptanalysis, but the crypto algorithms, the hashing and encryption algorithms that are accepted and should be avoided nowadays, how certificate authorities actually are, implemented, what is certificate enrollment, certificate revocation, what are the best practices whenever it comes to certificate and PKI infrastructures, right? And also other functions of cryptographic components and implementations that have a direct effect on technologies, even in, cloud services. Whenever you actually put some application in the cloud, how you protect an API or a web service using cryptography, right? Because at the end of the day, everything is using cryptography. Right now, you're logged in to a webinar. Hopefully in your browser, there's a lock, and we're actually using TLS, right? So all those type of scenarios or those type of technologies, you actually need to, it's a given that you need to know what they are, right? Now, as far as network security, access visibility, and control, I'm going to be very briefing here. You do have to, you need to know what is NetFlow. You need to know how to maintain visibility in the infrastructure. You need to know what is StealthWatch Cloud, what are the different, benefits of each implementation, what is TrustSec to implement or deploy automated policy enforcement, right? What is what we used to call NAC or Network Access Control has evolved into TrustSec, right? What is SGTs and how do you enforce policies in ICE? Using radios, how do you actually do a change of authorization? What I actually highlighting here, COA. And for some reason, actually, these two bullets got bold in here. They don't actually represent something. It's actually a kind of a typo in my site. They should not be bold. Everything here is equally distributed, right? The other thing that you have to know, you don't have to know how he actually operates from the behind the scenes, like from an academic paper per se, but you need to know what is encrypted traffic analytics, what is the way that, or the reason that these technologies exist, because of course malware and threat actors are actually using encryption, just like we do for good things, they use it for bad things, so they do it to obfuscate and bypass the security controls that we have, and what are the technologies that actually Cisco has actually created to mitigate and maintain visibility within the organization, right? And of course, things like dynamic iris inspection, layer 2 security, DHCP snooping, how to protect security infrastructure devices, and also routers and switches, right? How do you actually have best practices on how to harden infrastructure devices and protect the control plane, data plane, and management plane on those devices, right? And of course, now we start into the products, next generation firewalls, definitely concentrate a lot in FTD, right? In firepower threat defense and FMC. A lot of the questions probably are not going to be FDM, so the device manager only in one machine, in one a firewall. If not, it's probably going to be a combination of FMC and next generation firewalls, implementations, and also how to configure from a high level, right? The concentration exam, that's where you actually do the true configuration and troubleshooting. But in here, you need to know how application visibility and control, or AVC, is deployed, What is the difference between that and URL filtering and malware protection, file inspection, how AMP or advanced malware protection actually works, what are the types of disposition, how do you use threat intelligence coming from Cisco to apply policies, and how you tweak those policies and so on. Same thing goes for next generation intrusion prevention systems. And whenever it comes to site-to-site and remote access VPN, I also cannot sugarcoat this. You have to know the difference between each of the implementation of the technologies. From traditional crypto maps, right? That's what the command name that we do, and a lot of people actually, still refer to it as the traditional crypto map, implementations, or things like, have evolved throughout time. VMVPN, FlexVPN. What is the benefit of actually using FlexVPN? You need to know that FlexVPN, and of course, is actually the foundation is IKE version 2. You need to also know that IKE version 2 use IP for authentication in some cases. What are the differences between those implementations and the traditional ones? Including GRE over IPsec, right, in the past, and how some of the questions that you will get is not so much of define this or what is this definition, if not a scenario, right? You were hired to deploy the VPN technology for site-to-site VPNs, and you want to use something, I don't know, that is industry accepted, or you can not industry accepted, but at least a compatible, right? So if you have third-party VPN technology or VPN implementations, how you can actually do that, and of course that's where FlexVPN comes in with actually uses IKE version 2 and so on, right? Remote access VPN, of course, is a lot concentrated into the ASA and FTD implementations, right? And especially actually looking into AnyConnect, and also how AnyConnect is used other than VPN access, right? For AMP, for secure, remote access and so on. And in this case, even this core exam doesn't concentrate in the troubleshooting and so on. You may see here and there some scenario, you may have some type of command related to a debug, like debug crypto IPsec, debug crypto, IKE debugs. Definitely become familiar at least with what are the different IKE debugs and what are they used for, right? And they're fairly straightforward, right? I mean, debug IKE version 2 is for version 2, right? And they debug IKE version 1, and what are the differences between the two implementations and so on, right? Now, I had a couple of demos in here, but because of time, I am not going to do that, but I'm going to highlight a few other tips before I start taking questions, because I think it's actually where I will do to start taking some of the questions. But in the slides, I actually have a few references to things that are outside of Cisco, and especially whenever it comes to things like the portion of the securing the cloud. And securing the cloud basically is fairly broad, right? And it covers Cisco technologies that are hosted in the cloud, like Umbrella and StealthWatch Cloud and so on. So you have to know those, but also how to secure cloud implementations. Whenever you go into infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, what are the different shared responsibility models and so on. So for you to understand that, the first thing that you have to know is the definitions of cloud computing, right? What is infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, community clouds, hybrid clouds, all that. This is a must read. It's a special publication by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's not a standard itself, but it's a really, really good reference on the recommendations on how to define cloud computing. There are other, publications that I also have in these slides that we will make available as well, on where we have different related security-related guidelines for cloud computing, right? Now, whenever it comes to content security, that's where you actually really have to know not only Umbrella, and Investigate, but also the cloud security solutions like web security appliances, email security appliances, email security in the cloud, the integrations with things like Office 365, and so on, right? And I have a couple of screenshots in here for you. But what I'm going to do, since we actually cover, I guess, the majority of the slides in here, I am going to stop sharing real quick, and I'll probably just go back to the Q&A slide, actually. And I know that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A panel. If I share, I probably can't see the Q&A panel, but if you can actually summarize it for me, that would be awesome.
Hi, Mark. Yes, thank you so much for sharing everything. And there are some questions about like all the links that you saw on Omar's slides. They have been posted on the chat. And if you look any in particular, then we can let you know those ones. So I have assigned a couple of questions to you, but I will start with one that I found very interesting. And it says, I am a Cisco certified cyber ops. Is it admissible or is it possible for me to go for the CCNP security?
That's a really, really good question. So of course, this is all environmental, depending on your environment and what your career goal is, right? So if you started with cyber ops, you probably started because you wanted to actually move into a security operations center, right? So work in a security operations center, learn about incident response, potentially move into, the tiers of incident response. And as a matter of fact, let me actually just do that since I'm sharing. And I have a whiteboard here. This is what a SOC looks like. And typically you have level 1 or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They can have multiple, but this is the generic one. A lot of people actually start that take the CyberOps associate to be a tier 1 security analyst, right? And in there you actually get promoted, and in some cases people say demoted whenever you move up. But then you actually start moving into a senior analyst. Some other people call it investigators. Some other people, call it tier 2. Many different names. We're trying to standardize that in the industry, but you move up in that respect. Whenever you go to tier 3, and in some cases, some tier 1, they specialize more into very narrow specializations, like forensics. I'm just going to put F for short in here. Or threat hunting, TH, for threat hunting in there. And threat hunting is basically look proactively or iteratively throughout the organization for the things that an attacker could have bypassed, right? Your firewalls, you will never be perfect. Your IPS sensors will never actually, detect everything in the world, right? No technology will be perfect ever, right? So in that case, you actually progress to that. So going back to your question, the reason that I'm going through all of this is because naturally, a lot of people that are within this environment will not go to the CCNP, CCIE Security unless you are tasked to deploy or manage those technologies, right? And the Security Operations Center typically don't do that. So most people, what they do is, of course, are now waiting for the CyberOps professional, right? But if you actually are not part of a SOC and you actually are shifting gears into security and you want to specialize into Cisco technology, absolutely that's where you go to the CCNP, CCIE track, right? So thank you and good question.
Sure. We have many other questions. So another one is, what is the best path, in your opinion, to be successful in the SCOR core exam? Would you recommend a candidate to have the knowledge of CCNA certification or CyberOps certification, or both, as a good foundation?
Yes. So again, this all depends on the individual, right? Because a lot of the techniques that we kind of assume in the core exam that you already know, right, or the knowledge. So for example, what is a virus or Trojan or malware or ransomware? We cover a super high level, so it's a given that you already have to know that type of knowledge. So if you don't feel comfortable, you probably don't have to go through a whole certification like CCNA, right? But at least definitely study those. And that's what I actually put in these slides, is for you to at least the very minimum cybersecurity concepts that you need to know for the exam, right? But you're going to be the best judge as you progress, and you probably start, reading the books and going through the practice questions and so on to determine, hey, I probably should pause for now, even before I go into like DevSecOps and some of the other, items within the domains. Probably take a step back and probably even go to the curriculum of CyberOps Associate. And CyberOps Associate actually provides a really, really good foundation if you're just starting from scratch in security. Because actually that right there, it is by far the most popular for people actually shifting careers from even other technologies. As a matter of fact, I even have some colleagues that are CCIEs in other, technology like collaboration or data center and so on, but they don't have, not much background in cybersecurity, and they actually start with the CyberOps associate, right? So yeah, you're the best judge. I cannot tell you, you just go do the CyberOps associate before you go do this or take the CCNA, because CCNA is only a small domain that is security there, right? It's about 20% of the exam. So now the good thing is that the curriculum that we have and now the resources that we have as far as like the books and the trainings and everything else, they cover those basics, the stuff that you need to know for the exam. It's going to be very fast paced, but at least they actually, walks you through the things that you need to know for the exam. So thank you.
Thanks, Omar. There are actually many questions. We're going to try to answer as much as we can. If not, they will be available on the event page where you just register for this event. We are going to create an FAQ document with the answers. So, Omar, I found this question interesting. How does CCNP security compares with CISP if I'm pursuing a CISO role?
Yeah. So two different things. So CISSP is not a Cisco certification; it's an ISC Square certification. But that's a really fair question because I am and as a matter of fact, the only reason that I took the CISSP back in the day, probably about 14 years ago or probably more, it was because actually one of the customers that I had as a consultant actually required it. But anyways, it's a really good certification. I'm not going to bash any other certifications out here. It gives you an overall perspective of all the security domains. It goes into other things that are not technical. For example, disaster recovery. Disaster recovery absolutely can be technical, but at least from the governance perspective, it also goes into physical security, right, and all the overall domains. So it gives you somewhat of a good vocabulary in the industry that you can actually compare into that. Now, the core exam that we're talking about here is completely different, right? We're talking about Cisco technologies in here. We're talking about specializing on configuring, deploying, and troubleshooting those technologies. But it assumes that you also have that type of knowledge that CISSP introduces to you, right? Now, this exam is not like the CISSP that requires for you to actually have a letter that you have 2 years of experience, and somebody actually has to vouch for that, right? Even though we recommend that you have some, experience already in security for the professional and definitely for the expert level. That's another difference, right? That we don't have that restriction in there, and CISSP they do, right? But completely different. As a matter of fact, I'm more than glad to follow up, as you mentioned in the Q&A, and provide even additional information as well. I see a couple of other questions about other certifications like Security Plus or CEH and so on. But hopefully that makes sense.
It does make sense. So I'm going to make a couple more questions. What depth of knowledge of Python is required to tackle APIs in the lab?
Yes. So for the core exam, not that much. Don't be intimidated that you have to be a Python programmer for 10 years, right? Now, for the S-Auto exam, you have to have a lot more hands-on, right? So this is kind of the guiding path. There is an introduction to Python lab and concepts in DevNet, right? Definitely go through that, right? You will learn, what is Python packages like request, that you can actually do interactions with a RESTful API. You need to know what is a RESTful API. You need to know also from a RESTful API, not only how to interact with it, but how to protect them, right? I mentioned to you the crypto algorithms and so on, right? But don't be intimidated. You don't have to actually create a program this is a multiple choice exam, right? So you may actually get a question or two that you may have an example of some Python script interacting with some API or some JSON file coming, back as a result, and you have to actually interpret it, right? Not so much of actually creating an amazing, 5,000 line, Python script to interact with an API. Now in the S-Auto, that the concentration that changes a little bit more, right? That you have to have a little bit more hands-on experience.
Okay, thanks, Omar. Many questions, but there's one that you already mentioned before, but it would be nice that people keep that in mind. So, what is the CCNP security specialization that is currently high in demand in the market?
Well, it's very unfair for me to say one or the other on demand. Now, there's a big gap for sure in security automation. That's the reason that we created DevNet. That's the reason that a lot of people are transitioning to that. And at the end of the day, many things related to security and non-security technologies have to be automated. Right? You need to know, and not only automation into the matter of just, parsing some type of log and so on, but whenever it comes into after you parse that log, after the machine actually does some type of determination, what are the things that you also need to orchestrate, quote unquote orchestrate, and other tools to launch, other, even data to actually extract from infrastructure devices or endpoints. So that is super high on demand in the industry. Subsequently, that's why you see a lot of people taking the S-Auto exam, right? However, there are two ways that you take this type of certifications. One, that you actually want to explore something new and you want to actually be familiar with the concepts. That's one, right? And you want to shift the careers. And the second one is that you're already doing that and you were hired to be a firewall guy, or you were hired to be an IPS guy or, lady, or you were hired to be a VPN individual, right? So in other words, somebody that is actually tasked to deploy, configure, and troubleshoot, VPN implementation. So in many cases, it's actually not so much of just choosing one or the other, right? Is that that's part of your job, and to become better, you focus into those specializations.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Omar. And we are running out of time, so all the rest of the questions we will be continuing this conversation. In the community, we are going to create an FAQ with the questions and the answers. So I would like to thank you for sharing all your thoughts, Omar. And I would like to thank the audience for joining us today, even though the times are quite complicated. So thank you really much, all of you. So the next thing that we have to do is I would like to share with you some extra resources and references from everything that Omar has been talking and sharing on his slides. And also that are connected to this. They are like the video course that Omar has also worked about, the cloud computing related publications that he mentioned, and the upcoming certification guide for the CyberOps as well. So there's time to go up to the congratulate the winner. I really want to thank Omar because he's the one who's going to actually send out this signed book. So thank you very much. So what do you think we go with the book first, Omar?
Sounds good. Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay, that's fine. So we are doing this with random selection. So let me see if that person is here right now. Okay. I got here Marie Reed. Marie Reed. I don't know if Marie Reed is still among us. Yep. Seems like. Okay, so Marie Reed, you are the winner of the book. Actually, the signed book by Omar. So what's going to happen is people from the community team is going to contact you via email to find out your details so we can actually send that to your place. And we have another surprise, and that is the video course. Due to the COVID, it's more complicated to post the books, so we also have one video course of the CCNP and CCIE Security, all for free. So let me look out to the next person on the call. So pardon me if I don't pronounce this properly, but we do have Francois Lungjunian. So Francois, I did saw one of your questions on the chat. So you are the winner of the video session, and we are gonna contact you. So those are the winners. We are gonna send you all the signed book and the video material. So thank you very much for joining today. and we are going to contact you via email. So for all of you who didn't get the chance to win the signed book, we have great news for you. And if you can help us out to fulfill a survey that is actually coming out after this event, you will be able to redeem a 40% discount in any single title, including this Cisco certification from Omar. The code is SCOR. I have just placed it on the chat, so you just can see it right there. If you fill out this survey and you put the SCOR, you will be able to redeem a 40% discount in any Cisco Press title that you are looking for, including, of course, this official certification guide for the security CCNP and CCIE. So you can see more details. The SCOR is the code that you have to use to redeem that one. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Mara. Thank you so much for all the team to make this happen. And I wish you, all of you, have a great day, and we should see you next time. So thank you, Omar, for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You too.